What would you do if your wife was standing in your kitchen humming your song, while your pilot sister called to say that same woman just boarded her plane to Zurich? When love splits into two faces, truth stops knocking and starts hunting. Tonight's story follows Mason Hale, a man who trusted the small habits that never lie, and the sister who watched a ghost take row 2A. Stay with me as we trace the footsteps of an impostor, a handler, and a marriage turned into a crime scene. Before we begin, if intense betrayal and revenge stories are your thing, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Cheating Stories 7 so you never miss a twist. Now, let's step into my cheating wife boarded my sister's plane. So who was in my house? Lauren Hale never called from the cockpit unless gravity itself was about to betray her. Yet Mason caught her whisper through the hiss of headsets and altitude. Mason, Carina just boarded my flight to Zurich, first class, row 2A. The words didn't ring, they hollowed the kitchen. Steam fogged the glass of the en-suite where Carina hummed the tune she always claimed was their song. Same notes, same casual melody, except it suddenly felt rehearsed. On the marble counter, her passport sat beneath a careless coffee ring. Mason flipped it open, Carina's photo, Carina's signature, the green eyes that had silenced every doubt he'd ever had. Maybe it's a mix-up, he managed, though the syllables tasted of metal. Switches clacked in Lauren's background. Pre-takeoff checklists rattled. Then her voice again, hard as a verdict. I'm staring at her passport and at her. The line cut. Static filled his ear, or maybe it was just fear. Shower hiss died. A woman stepped out, auburn hair dripping, towel knotted loosely, her eyes searching his with that same trained concern. Everything okay? She asked, twisting the wedding band, Carina's nervous tick executed perfectly. Mason kissed her cheek, lips brushing the pulse he counted like a soldier checking for booby traps. She laughed, airy, and called him intense. He smiled back with the discipline of a man betraying his own training. She dressed for a client meeting, left the faint trace of perfume he didn't recognize, and shut the front door with a sound that felt final. Mason waited 5 long breaths, then locked his office. He powered up the emergency rig he swore he'd never use at home. Router logs, camera grids, cell pings. Truth wouldn't come politely, he would hunt it. On his screens, last night replayed in fast silence. She used her left hand to stir tea. Carina broke her left wrist in college. Since then, she'd favored her right for everything. She filed cumin on the second row. Carina kept it front row always. Life's easier when spice is easy. Small fingerprints smeared into lies. Door sensor data showed 2 entries that morning. Audio revealed heel clicks with no matching video. His credit card sweep found the impossible. The same account charging a latte in Seattle while paying for a lounge pass in Geneva. Hotel pre-auths ghosting his sister's routes. Not coincidence, choreography. Then the text, running late, don't wait up, love you, punctuated, perfect spacing. Carina never punctuated love, she spilled it like water. He checked the bathroom. Her perfume bottle had shifted an inch from the groove it had carved into wood. The toothbrush bristles flared differently than last week. In the closet, a smaller suitcase hid inside theirs with a false bottom trained to fool. On his laptop, a new MAC address appeared at 3:11 a.m., vanished after 7 minutes, not her device. A second ghost, 2 entries, 2 devices, 2 people inside his marriage. Mason set the passport back beneath the coffee ring, realigned it exactly. Evidence was for prosecutors. He needed certainty, and certainty required traps. He stared at the empty bathroom door, pulse steadying to its old rhythm. If you want the truth, don't ask for it, hunt it. And as dawn scraped the skyline, Mason dialed the only man who had bled beside him and lived to take another call, Dale Rourke. But when Dale answered, his first words weren't hello, they were, Mason, you're already in the file. Dale Rourke slid a manila folder across the glass desk like it might leave a burn mark. Start with the faces, he said. Mason opened it. Airport CCTV stills, hotel lobbies, elevator mirrors, angles that slice truth into paper-thin lies. The woman looked like Carina until you asked her to do something only Carina's face could. Crinkle left before right when she laughed, soften at the sight of a stray dog wince at cilantro. In freeze frames, the impostor's smile stopped at her lips, never reaching her eyes. It was the kind of difference you couldn't explain to a stranger but could never unsee once named. Her real name is Vera Knight, Dale said. Industrial seduction, long cons. Sometimes they replace the spouse. Sometimes they play mistress while the replacement takes root. Your file pings a handler, Archero Devane, ex-special ops, now hired poison. He tapped one still, a man in a slate suit, posture sharpened into nothingness, stood in an elevator reflection. That's him. The photos told a second story, nastier for its precision. Vera entering a boutique hotel with Devane, leaving hours later alone. Vera kissing a CFO with a ring tan in an elevator mirror. Vera's phone screen glowing 15 minutes later, thumbs dancing on an encrypted app. The same rhythm appeared after every pillow talk with Mason. 15 minutes to launder intimacy into intelligence. Cheating wasn't collateral damage, it was the engine fuel. Mason's throat locked on Carina's name. What about her? Dale's voice thinned. Sofia, 8 months ago, Bulgarian police wrote a missing person report, then buried it under dust. A detective filed 2 memos, then transferred to traffic. Someone paid for the shovel and chose a quiet hill. Mason's eyes burned. In the living room, Vera's sweater, Carina's sea glass blue, lay folded on the chair as if comfort could be borrowed. The fabric smelled like a memory misfiled. Mason forced himself into lists because lists turned grief into weapons. Carina missing, house compromised, bed infiltrated. Sister saw what his kitchen refused. He breathed in 4s until the numbers behaved. Dale cracked Vera's digital life with the neat cruelty that once made him dangerous. Her phone's encrypted app used a custom keyboard that erased itself. But the OS still betrayed her. Battery spikes, radios waking, ghost MAC addresses brushing the Hale Wi-Fi for 7-minute windows. That's a handoff, Dale said. They park outside, connect, drain whatever she staged. You were right, 2 people in your marriage. Mason cloned the phone, indexed its exhaust. Location caches, Bluetooth whispers, networks joined and abandoned. A rhythm emerged. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Vera jogged lakeside, paused under a pedestrian bridge where the camera had been broken for months. Wednesdays, a black sedan idled 3 houses down, always 9 minutes, always dawn. Fridays, she booked spa appointments she never attended, then met Devane by a service door. Doctrine disguised as routine. Mason ran face embeddings against his old databases. Devane flickered near defense symposiums, venture dinners where wine cost more than startups. Vera appeared under different names in different cities, always in reflections, never on guest lists. A Warsaw airport line showed her with yet another passport. The work wasn't sloppy, it was arrogant, as if it thought artistry meant immunity. Dale stacked another folder on top like a verdict. Banks, $4 900 deposits every 10 days into an account she opened the same week you hired a new cryptography team, just under reporting thresholds, regular as tides, and withdrawals match when that sedan lights up the neighborhood towers. Mason's jaw clenched. Her leverage wasn't just code, he said. It was me. Always is, Dale replied. They pick targets with something to lose and someone to love. You're efficient at both. Night pressed its face to the windows. Vera's sweater blurred into a shape without meaning. Mason mapped her last 10 days, pins stabbing paper like storm cones on a weather chart. Zurich glowed too bright too often. He opened a folder labeled HOB. Carina used to tease him, habits, obsessions, blind spots. He began filling Vera's, left hand for forks, right hand for pens. Coffee black in public, cream at home, never sat with her back to a door unless she'd already swept the room. And once, distracted, she hummed Carina's old tune, then stopped mid-bar like a thief caught in the wrong shoes. These weren't quirks. These were tripwires, and Mason would wire them into a trap. Dale's phone buzzed. He frowned. Your sister's flight lands on time, but tomorrow's schedule? Pilots swap on a route that never swaps. That's not routine. That's someone leaning on the system. Mason's stomach hardened. They know she saw her. They suspect, Dale said. At this stage, paranoia is protocol. Mason's eyes lingered on their wedding photo. Carina laughing in sunlight, mouth open in joy he could still hear but couldn't remember the joke behind. If she left breadcrumbs, she left them where I could find them. She always did. Dale wiped the table with his sleeve, old superstition. So what's your play? Mason slid Vera's phone back to the angle she'd left it, as precise as a counterfeit life. His voice was calm, but his eyes were already on fire. We keep the theater running. We give them a show they can't resist, and then we pull the string Carina wrapped in plain sight. Dale tilted his head. Bait. Mason's smile was sharp as broken glass. Not bait, honey, the kind that coats everything it touches. He shut the laptop, the hum of its fan swallowing the room's silence. Tomorrow, Vera would ask for help with his presentation slides, and Mason would give her exactly what she wanted, only sweeter, stickier, and fatal to touch. Hale Quantum's war room smelled of whiteboard ink baked by halogens and coffee that had surrendered twice. Mason stood over the pitch deck like a surgeon reviewing vitals before slicing. Vera had asked sweetly to understand the math so I don't embarrass you if clients ask. So he gave her math that looked like truth and behaved like sabotage. Fonts matched, swagger matched, but the veins were poisoned. Error correction bent the wrong way by a decimal ghost. A prime number sat cracked, invisible unless tested in battle. Any surface review would applaud. Any real deployment would implode. He layered traps with the care of a jeweler setting flaws into diamonds. Metadata seeded with signatures he could later read like fingerprints. Revision history comments that never showed on screen. A checksum routine disguised as housekeeping that, once touched, became a flare gun screaming across a constellation of rented cloud servers, each hidden under bland names. Storage Inc. 02, Doc Backup 93, and then cruelty, the kind that kept his wife alive. Not obvious typos, but the kind of frictionless errors spell checkers love to fix. Each automated correction unlocked a new branch of sabotage. If Devaine's people polished the prose, the payload would bloom like rot in summer heat. That night dinner became domestic theater. Vera wore Carina's apron, Carina's laugh, and plated salmon as though nourishment could notarize identity. Your big day, she purred, thumb drawing lazy circles on his wrist. Mason answered with anecdotes dressed in patience. He slipped in a phantom weakness. We may need aggressive key rotations. A phrase designed to bloom like a red flag in a handler's inbox. Later, Vera left for a client. Dale followed. In an alley cam's narrow rectangle, Vera pressed Devane against brick and kissed him like victory. He endured it like weather cold-eyed, counting minutes. She handed him the drive Mason had meant for her. Mason texted Dale, clock starts now. On his office wall, a digital map lit like nerves waking. Geneva, Prague, Denver, each ping pulsed like a confession. Somewhere, someone tried to dodge his trackers by printing without opening. Mason almost laughed. His fonts carried microscopic watermarks baked into ligature spacing. Any printout would tell him the model, the network path, the courier route. And sure enough, a mailroom camera caught a man in a brown cap feeding a thick envelope into a bin. The barcode told Mason everything, where it would travel when it would be scanned. The world helped if you trained it how. Then the malware began to sing. Geneva cracked first. A developer attempted a harmless refactor. Within 30 seconds, Mason had a list of mounted volumes he'd never requested. 2 minutes later, he saw credential stashes disguised as temp. 5 minutes, a NAS labeled events, not birthdays, something darker. Audio from Dale's mic in the alley fed into his ear. A week, Devane said, voice like a blade polished thin. He pitches in a week. I want operational code by then. If the keys rotate, we rotate faster. Vera's laugh followed brittle jewelry. And your wife, still a ghost. Ghosts don't hum in kitchens, she said. I'll haunt him until you tell me to vanish. Mason's hands stayed steady. In Prague, an operator typed trial 3 times before backspacing to model. In Denver, another copied the poisoned deck to a thumb drive named Family Pics. Mason tagged its serial. If it breathed anywhere else, he'd know. Then something stranger, a beacon pinged from Lauren's flight path. A dead Wi-Fi SSID revived itself, the private network name Carina and Mason once used when traveling, an inside joke hidden in airports. Devices remember what hearts refuse to forget. If Carina touched that phone, she was alive, close to runways, close to being moved. He cross-checked logs, found a service closet camera rebooted after parts delay. 32 minutes of blackout, then a blur, a woman small and deliberate replacing a panel. One frame froze her almost looking at the lens. The jawline, the mouth set in refusal, Carina, or someone wearing her stubbornness. Mason printed the still and pinned it under a magnet on the fridge. Evidence could also be a vow. He messaged Lauren, weather's moving east. Childhood code, she'd know. The Geneva servers coughed up more. A folder named Silos revealed spreadsheets with numbers rounded too clean, perfect for bribes. Another folder, Housekeeping, held intake photos of prisoners labeled not by names but by grid, D3C, E2A. The kind of coordinates you could overlay on a floor plan if you had one. He didn't. Not yet. But the map was sharpening. The net was closing. For the first time in weeks, Mason inhaled fully, ribs stretching without protest. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm coming." On his screen, one last beacon pulsed, an Alpine IP block tied to a secluded property above a glacial lake. The name in the log, Facility Weather. Mason stared, pulse steadying into resolve. The storm Carina warned him about had a roof, a door, and coordinates. Lauren's next route chased daylight across the Atlantic, a thin silver seam stitching continents together. At cruise, the cockpit quieted to the soft machinery of trust, gauges steady, sky disciplined into endless blue, a chime. The cabin manager stepped in with professional calm masking curiosity. A small sealed envelope slid onto Lauren's knee. The handwriting on the front hit harder than turbulence, blocky, deliberate letters she hadn't seen since their first apartment spice jars. Carina's print? Inside, a dull locker key taped to a torn page from a children's book the sisters could recite blind. On the back, a single line in those square letters, "If I go quiet, follow our bad weather." Their old family code, born of childhood storms, counting thunder seconds and betting on when rain would arrive. Follow the isobars, follow the pressure drop, follow us. Lauren finished her checklist with a voice steady as glass. When wheels touched tarmac, she gave herself exactly 1 minute in a staff lavatory to be human, tears sharp as salt-counted breaths, a face rebuilt in the mirror. Then she called Mason. "The note's real," she whispered. "She left you a key for a reason," Mason said. "Use it, call me from the locker." The staff corridor smelled like coffee grounds and floor wax. Lauren found the forgotten bank of metal lockers behind a maintenance door, the kind of place tourists never notice. The key slid in with a click too intimate for steel. Inside, an envelope, a passport bearing Carina's face but with another name and haircut, a Vienna bank slip with a box number, and a Polaroid that froze time. Carina's threadbare teddy bear, left ear stitched thicker than the right. Their family's private joke. The bear heard storms only on one side. Mason met her 2 hours later in a shadowed staff lot, baseball cap low, a disguise that fooled no one. He studied the Polaroid, mouth bending in something too bitter to be called a smile. "She trusted the teddy," he murmured. "Of course she did." The bear had been boxed for charity when they moved years ago. Mason had pulled it back last second, unable to let strangers carry that weight. Now in the storage cage, he pried open the plastic bin still labeled in Carina's hand. The bear sagged in his grip, absurd and holy. His thumb pressed the thick ear. The seam gave, a slit, a click. A safe deposit key winked from the felt like it had been waiting for its cue. Vienna greeted them with marble and discretion. A banker slid the box along rails with a face trained to see haunted eyes and name them Tuesday. Inside, a ledger fat with names, shell companies braided like vines, cash flows disguised as philanthropy. Photographs from vantage points only a wife could hold without suspicion. Airport gates kissed in routine, hotel bars with laughter blurred, event lobbies cataloged like exhibits. Carina had not been naive. She had gone hunting and been hunted. At the bottom, a flash drive labeled in her hand. One folder, weather. Mason opened it on the bank's secure terminal. Maps appeared, routes traced with a patient pen, all converging on a property above a glacial lake in the Alps. No tourist pin, no brochure. Roads drawn boring on purpose, inhospitable on foot. Carina's annotations. Generator spikes when no load required, blackout intervals too disciplined to be chance, delivery schedules logged like pulse charts. Back in Seattle, Dale cross-matched the utility patterns with satellite captures. His voice came grainy over speakerphone. That facility's built like a lung. Inhales through one service road, exhales waste down another. 2 real entrances, maybe 3 disguised as rock. If we spasm the lung, kill lights, scramble fire suppression, lock doors, we can make it choke on itself. Mason closed his eyes. He saw Vera raising a pistol, her intimacy stolen. He saw Lauren among passengers, carrying codes in her pocket while flying storms overhead. He saw Carina choosing a children's book page because messages hide best inside innocence. Spasm the lung, Mason echoed. His voice had the iron calm of a man setting coordinates. The banker coughed politely, reminding them the room still existed. Mason repacked each artifact with the precision Carina had written into the evidence. Every page squared, every photo face down. Evidence wasn't just proof. It was a promise to survive long enough to read it. Back at the hotel, Lauren flipped the ledger while Mason mirrored the flash drive onto 2 air-gapped devices. One for now, one hidden where only thunder finds it. Names clicked into place with the maps in his head. A boutique law firm repeating across continents. Foundations that funneled bribes. A helicopter pilot filing mountain corridor routes when no weather supported it. Arrogance disguised as logistics. Lauren's voice was low. "What's your move?" "They think they are reading my life," Mason said. "Let's give them a page they can't resist." He typed a travel request under an old military alias, Zurich, aligning perfectly with the consortium pitch. He pushed it through a burner Vera had once found. Bait always works best when it feels familiar. Lauren nodded, tapping confirmation. "And the bear?" Mason set the Polaroid beside his laptop, letting the stitched ear stare back. "He's the map. She told us where the weather gathers. Now we follow." Vienna's evening washed the window gold. The Danube slid like a vein under light. South, mountains crouched, patient and silent. Mason felt the strange clarity that arrives when grief mutates into mission. He traced the Alpine route with one finger, imagining the sound the facility would make when its steel lungs learned what drowning feels like. In the quiet, Mason's encrypted terminal blinked with a new beacon. IP origin, Zurich. Username, VK Knight. Vera was already in position. Mason looked at Lauren. The theater's about to open. Zurich glowed with honest money lacquered over dishonest intent. Mason checked into a cheap business hotel and built a pocket war out of cash purchases that looked like parody on any customs form. A climbing harness folded inside his duffel like a coiled muscle. Prusik cords, diamond bit drills, a coil of Cat 6 that might pass for rope in dim light, 2 cans of compressed air, a roll of gaffer tape, ferrite beads, zip ties, innocent tools dreaming of criminal work. The honey files sang. A suite at the Hotel Precedent, Wilson pulsed his beacons like a heartbeat. Cameras caught Vera arriving in a black sheath dress, hair cropped to a blade's edge, smile sharpened for boardrooms and back doors alike. Devane followed, framed by 2 men with the posture of ex-morality. They rode a private elevator Mason had already taught to hiccup, bribing a night engineer to reboot it on a timer. Elevators tell stories in their pauses. Mason read them from the street, a maintenance tablet on his lap, patient as tide. At 23:58, Vera exited alone, shoulders tight in the angle of someone praised and threatened in the same breath. Dale's voice ghosted through Mason's bud. Charter filed to a private strip in the mountains. Clear skies. They'll think they are untouchable. The road spiraled like a thought refusing itself. On the third switchback above the lake, Mason killed his lights and let the car tick itself to silence. Below, the compound glittered across the mountain like a man-made constellation. He exhaled steam into gloved fingers until they obeyed. The maintenance shaft he'd mapped weeks ago exhaled its own warmth, an arrogant HVAC louver cycling on a rhythm no one thought worth watching. At 03:02 he crawled, counting the camera sweeps he himself had introduced with a poisoned firmware patch Geneva believed was routine. Inside smelled of antiseptic welded to fear. He passed a junction box, clipped a ferrite bead so the next surge would look like weather. In a supply closet, he dropped a bridge across the fiber and shut the panel gently, like a locksmith confident in his silence. The service corridor glared with the kind of light that makes skin gray. A laundry cart waited, uniforms wrapped in plastic like fresh lies. He shrugged into one, pushed the cart, clipboard tilted at the universal angle of staff who want only to vanish. A guard glanced, cart, badge, reflection in glass, and waved him on. Permission granted to be invisible, the first double-cross war success's mask. His command to the fire system cascaded neatly, zones clicked, sprinklers hissed, doors unlatched in orderly panic. Cameras went dark in halves as planned, but the other halves pivoted, tightened focus on his corridor. Somewhere someone had not trusted software. A redundant eye blinked open. Mason did not run. Running attracts bullets. He slowed. Slowness attracts boredom. Boredom opens doors. He detoured into laundry. Battery drill buzzing under industrial roar. 2 screws coaxed from a vent grate. He slid inside, left the cart behind like a ghost no one would bother to report. The vent breathed him toward the detention level. Pumps throbbed, fans pulsed, the building's heart thudding like a patient predator. He dropped into a plenum above a corridor, shadows swallowing him. On his tablet, his stolen map bloomed into fact. Badge swipes live, sprinkler loops obedient, doors whispering open in sequence. Enemy infrastructure bent to his will. The first lock lied, open on logs, steel in reality. He bypassed, fingers dancing through 2 keystrokes disguised as a glitch. The door sighed and relented. Emergency LEDs bled the corridor in red. He crossed to a viewing window. The cell inside was designed to end sentences. Carina sat on a bunk, thinner but unbroken, her hands relaxed in her lap, her chin tilted in defiance disguised as calm. When her gaze lifted, there was no surprise, only recognition, as though she had been practicing meeting his eyes in her mind for months. Mason touched the pad. The lock released with a metallic exhale. Carina rose, staggered once, then steadied herself. Her voice scraped with sand but held shape. "You always forget to knock." "Your sister says hi," Mason murmured, crossing the room in 3 steps. He didn't embrace her, not yet. He checked pupils, gait, reflex to light, the survival checklist that had once kept him alive and now anchored her. Together they stepped into the corridor, and then the redundant eye whispered to a human. Alarms detonated into sirens. Red deepened to screaming crimson. Doors slammed steel opinions. The building inhaled for war. Mason placed a steadying hand on Carina's back, pointed left to the stairwell where he had loosened the crash bar, and gave her the smile of the man he had sworn never to be again. "We write the next page," he said. The mountain answered with boots. From the far end of the corridor, a voice cut through the alarms. Calm, precise, venom wrapped in civility. "Mr. Hale, finally." Devane stepped into the red glow, Vera at his side, pistol leveled at Carina. The corridor had narrowed into a throat. Alarms pulsed like a wounded heart. Heat and sprinkler mist thickened the air until breath felt rationed. Then Archero Devane stepped out of shadow, a predator who knew exactly how his presence worked. His smile was small, surgical, as if saving energy for the kill. 2 rifles flanked him at the low, disciplined angle of men trained to make death efficient. Beside him stood Vera, hair plastered to her cheek, droplets running like punctuation down skin that once played wife. The pistol in her hand leveled at Carina with an intimacy that looked rehearsed. "You were a decent husband for a decoy," she said, voice warm as a champagne toast. "Pity you weren't content just being adored." Mason didn't blink. "Pity you weren't content to be loyal to anyone, handler, client, husband. You slept with all of us and belonged to none." Vera's shrug was feline, careless. "Belonging is a fairy tale weak people tell themselves. I prefer outcomes." Devane echoed her, his tone colder. "Outcome, you drop the toy in your hand, step away from my problem, and the woman lives long enough to forget you efficiently." Mason's thumb tapped the phone hidden in his palm. Wrong order. Far above, the server room swallowed a command it thought it had invented. Sprinklers screamed white ropes. Fire doors locked, unlocked, then slammed shut again in panic. Dampers wheezed. The building inhaled foam like a drowning beast. Emergency LEDs deepened from red to blood. The infrastructure twisted into a weapon that didn't know whose side it was on. In the churn, Devane lunged. Mason shoved Carina behind a steel column and caught a graze to the shoulder that burned him awake. His return fire was lean, almost merciful in precision. One bullet kissing the first guard's knee, another ricocheting conduit to blind the second, a third shattering a floodlight that turned the hallway into shrapnel rain. Vera's pistol tracked Carina again, unshaken. Mason stepped into the line, felt a round hiss past his ear, and shot the gun from her hand. It skittered into a puddle, sparks hissing like a temper tantrum. For a fraction of a second, Vera almost looked human. Her smile cracked into something sad, almost respectful, before she stooped to snatch a fallen guard's sidearm. But Carina moved first. 8 months in captivity had taught her cadence. The pause between command and obedience. The arrogance in men who thought they owned minutes. She swung the chair she had sat on, its legs crashing into Vera's temple with a sound like a church bell cut short. The impostor folded, all stolen grace fleeing at once. "Down!" Mason barked. Carina obeyed without thought, sliding behind the column, scanning angles with the instinct they'd once earned together. Devane cursed, fired twice. Sparks shrieked from the railing, and the third kiss of heat split Mason's already bleeding shoulder. Mason answered with a low, clean shot into Devane's calf. The handler dropped, but the pistol stayed in his grip. Professionals die last, and then new sirens, louder, outside. Boots hammered their grammar into the building. Commands in accented English collided with the building's digital panic. Swiss federal police stormed the corridor, rifles raised, black uniforms dripping with sprinkler water. They moved with a precision born of paperwork Mason had couriered days earlier, routes, bribes, procurement trails. Paper had marched faster than guns. "Hands!" A leader barked. Mason raised his first, tablet balanced where everyone could see. Carina followed, slow, knuckles scraped but proud. Devane hesitated half a beat too long, 3 lasers painted his chest, and he yielded with theatrical care, lowering the pistol as if setting down fine crystal. Vera stirred, groaned. An officer's muzzle greeted her at eye level. She rolled to her knees, palms up, mouth curling back into that almost smile. "Officer," she said sweetly in German, "I am a victim, these people." "Save it for your lawyer," the leader snapped, not even glancing at her. Plastic cuffs ratcheted into place. Devane looked across them at Mason like a man reading an ending that insulted him. "Love is just leverage," he said coldly. "You changed hands tonight." Mason's shoulder throbbed. He met Carina's steady eyes before answering. "Maybe, but I own the invoice." 2 officers hauled Vera upright. She studied Mason with curiosity, almost admiration. "You built a beautiful trap," she murmured in English meant for him alone. "Elegant, pity you didn't spring it sooner." Mason's voice was steel. "It's been sprung since the first day you lied. You just mistook the theater for rehearsal." They were marched past server racks still dripping confusion. Screens scrolled Mason's parasites harvest, names, passwords, bank trails, already shipping to regulators, journalists, lawmen. The compound had nothing left to bargain with. On the tarmac, the mountain exhaled night cold enough to sting clean. Patrol cars idled in geometry. A helicopter beat the air into obedience. Carina walked beside Mason without leaning, but close enough her shadow overlapped his. Behind them, Vera's almost smile vanished into the van's dark mouth. Devayne's eyes still did math he could never finish. Ahead, the road unwound toward Zurich, toward morning. Lauren's text finally came through, wheels down. Say when and where. Mason typed back, thumb trembling only slightly. Storm passed, standing in the rain anyway. Carina's hand brushed his, not clinging, renewing. The bill had been presented. But in Mason's chest, he knew debts like this never really clear. Interest waits. And somewhere in the dawn, another page was already rustling open. 3 weeks later, Seattle looked like forgiveness viewed through glass. Ferries stitched white scars across the Sound. The skyline glittered with an eagerness that almost felt like apology. In their kitchen, Carina ate without flinching when a car backfired down the street. She didn't freeze, she named it. Exhaust, not gunfire. Then kept chewing. Lauren stopped waking at 3:07 a.m., the minute her cockpit call had snapped a life in half. For a week, she set her alarm to 3:08 like a dare, then deleted it and finally slept. Hale Quantum's real system went live behind walls only Mason and 2 mathematicians could name. Its lattice was so tight that even mistakes were deliberate. The pitch to the defense consortium was a ceremony. Contracts signed themselves. Press releases used phrases like resilient architecture and defense-grade assurance. No one wrote, "We built this in the aftershock of betrayal." They did not post about the arrests. They did not cash in on their pain. Revenge worked best as a ledger reconciled in silence. Mason dropped anonymous packets into the laps of regulators who still believed in their own teeth, into banks laundering bribes under the name of philanthropy, into the inbox of a journalist who had once refused 3 book deals to keep her integrity unbought. Audits bloomed. Awards dinners vanished. Procurement officers resigned to spend time with family in the middle of fiscal years. Devayne, cornered, traded 3 colleagues for leniency, a man discovering he'd never been the chessboard, only the piece. Vera survived, pled down to a thicket of charges, and sent Mason a letter he never opened. He fed it to flame without bitterness. Not anger, policy. Some rooms only manufacture storms. On a Sunday, they drove north. Carina's mother answered with hands trembling, tea too strong, cookies too sweet. She touched Carina's face like it might dissolve if she blinked. "You're thinner," she whispered, which in their family meant you came back. On the drive home, silence finally belonged to quiet, not aftermath. On Monday, Carina stood in the Hale Quantum lobby beneath glass that had once reflected an impostor's face. "I don't want to go back to Interpol," she said, not because she couldn't, but because back was the wrong direction. "But I won't pretend danger belongs to other people." "Then we do what we've always done," Mason said. "We tell the weather before it hits." He typed weather into a shared file, not nostalgia, but policy. Together, they began drafting protocols that weren't quite consultancy, weren't quite vigilantism, but something sharp in between. They rebuilt the house too, not with contractors, but with choices. The cumin went back to the front row, olive oil left a vinegar, so the room remembered them right. Door sensors now whispered only to a private server and to Lauren, because love is a network, not a password. The teddy bear returned to its shelf, its crooked ear silent proof that some totems tell the truth without speaking. That night, they ate on the deck while the Sound carried the day away. Carina reached for his hand, not like a lifeline anymore, but like a promise renewed. "The worst part," she said softly, "wasn't the cell. It was knowing someone wore my life and called it love." Mason thought of Vera's stolen apron, her rehearsed laugh, the way she'd choreographed betrayal into quarterly reports. He thought of the printer watermark that had exposed lies, the elevator that had confessed on schedule, the ledger that had finally closed. "Cheating steals nouns," he said. "Wife, home, bed, we took them back." The quiet stretched, and for the first time in months it held steady. Then Mason's phone buzzed, an encrypted message. Corporate blackmail, a contractor trying to clone Hale Quantum's code, a junior engineer boxed in by NDAs and men who said acceptable exposure like prayer. Carina read the screen and smiled, not afraid but ready. Together, always. His answer was no longer a vow but a protocol. He drafted a reply that was warning wrapped as question, attached proofs dressed as ordinary documents. At the bottom, one line written in their family code, follow the pressure drop. Morning would bring another storm. Some you can't stop, but you can arm the right people with umbrellas. The men who sell rain would learn that invoices always come due. Later that night, Mason woke at 2:11, not from nightmares, just thirst. He found Carina already in the kitchen, city lights carving silver across her face. "We should travel," she said, "but with our names." "With our names," he agreed. The past still existed, but it no longer got a vote. If anyone ever tried to crawl back into their lives wearing a borrowed face, they would know where to look first. The small habits that don't lie, the love that doesn't need an audience, the map that always updates. And when the next message arrived, as it always does for those who refuse to outsource their courage, they would open the folder named Weather, draw the lines, and walk into the storm together. That is where the storm lands. Mason did not just expose a cheating wife. He reclaimed the nouns that Betrayal tried to steal: wife, home, sister, truth. In the end, the mask fell, the handler bled, and the ledger closed without applause. But here is the question only you can answer. If the person you love suddenly wears two lives, which detail would you trust first? The words or the habits that never lie? Tell me in the comments. If this story kept you watching, tap like. Subscribe to Cheating Stories 7 and share it with someone who loves high-stakes twists. Your support helps more people find these stories, and it tells the algorithm that truth still matters. See you in the next one.